Activated sponsorships outperform underactivated sponsorships, hands down. Everyone agrees that activation matters, but how much does it matter? When you start looking at consumer research, portfolio performance, and brand owner behavior, a pretty consistent pattern emerges. And the difference isn't marginal, it's significant. It shows up in consideration, it shows up in brand opinion, it shows up in competitive advantage, and ultimately it shows up in return on investment. Now, before we go any further, it is worth defining what activation actually is. Because activation isn't an event, it's not a social post, it's not a hospitality program, and it's certainly not a logo on a jersey. Activation is the process of turning sponsorship rights into business outcomes. It's how a brand owner uses the audiences, the assets, the associations, the content opportunities, the retail programs, the employee initiatives, the digital channels, and the experiences connected to a sponsorship to achieve a specific set of objectives. The rights fee creates access, it's activation that determines what a brand does with that access. And that's an important distinction because sponsorship conversations often start with acquisition. Property, audience, rights package, the fee, all of those things matter and they matter a lot. But once a sponsorship is acquired, it's the activation quality that becomes one of the most important determinants in performance. The challenge isn't that the brand owner organizations don't understand this. Most, in fact, do. The challenge is that the investment behavior often tells a very different story. Research conducted by the World Federation of Advertisers and Lumency found that 76% of global brand owners identify measuring and demonstrating ROI as the biggest challenge facing sponsorship. Yet on average, less than 1% of sponsorship budgets are allocated to measurement. A similar disconnect exists in activation. On average, brand owners invest about 76 cents in activation for every dollar invested in sponsorship rights. And that figure has declined in recent years. We recently reviewed a brand owner portfolio where for every dollar being spent on rights fee, 11 cents was being spent on activation. 11. In other words, organizations consistently identify performance as a priority while underinvesting in activities that directly influence performance. And the consequences are measurable. Research from McKinsey identified a tenfold difference in ROI between the highest and the lowest performing sponsorships within the same portfolios. Think about that for a moment. Tenfold, not 10%, 10 times. Properties differ, objectives differ, markets differ, but activation quality remains one of the variables most closely associated with sponsorship performance. Consumer research tells a similar story. In a recent sponsorship effectiveness study conducted for a limited client, consumers aware of sponsorship activations reported significantly stronger consideration, brand opinion, and competitive preference outcomes over consumers aware of the sponsorship alone. Purchase consideration increased by as much as 25 percentage points among consumers aware of the activations. Among consumers aware of the sponsorship alone, the lift was closer to 8 points. Brand opinion followed a similar pattern. But the most interesting point was competitive. Among consumers aware of the sponsorship and its activations, the sponsor's advantage versus competitors was often neutral or negative. Among consumers aware of the activations, the advantage increased by as much as 30 points. Same property, same rights fees, different outcome. And that's really the point. The rights fee isn't where the sponsor performance is determined. The rights fee is where the sponsor performance begins. The question shouldn't be, is this property worth the asking price? The question should be, do we have the activation plan? Do we have the budget? Do we have the capabilities? Do we have the resources? And do we have the commitment required to capitalize on the opportunity? Because sponsored value isn't realized when rights fees are purchased, it's realized when those rights are put to work. If you're a brand owner looking to improve the effectiveness of your portfolio, look at activation quality first. And we can help with that. Let's connect.